All right, so again, our Bible study tonight is going to be just a review moving forward. We're going to look at the chart, which I will put up on the TV screen. A few of you have the chart we can refer to as well. And so we're just going to have some discussion about discipleship. That's really, I kind of want this to be an open discussion about what it means to be a disciple, to be discipled, to move forward. And then as we take a look at some of the concepts on the chart, again, we're not trying to set anything in stone necessarily, but we do want to kind of, I think, collaborate on where we're at so far, and then moving forward, if we feel there's either anything missing or something that could be added or something, let's talk about that, or just cover some of the concepts that I have here and just see where we go. We've pretty much really covered, the first 7 in depth several times as we've met over the weeks. And again, that really just begins the forming process of getting to a message of discipleship, if you will. We've talked about what it means to learn how to have a servant's heart and serve one another and serve our community with compassion. And when God sees us doing these things and begins to entrust us with truth, we grow in the ways we disseminate truth. That really is supposed to be the key. And once I believe that we have shown, that we are working, just like even another job or career that you have, as you've shown that you've learned the processes and you've learned the rules, regulations, if you will, how everything is done within that, that focus, then eventually you get out of that probation period and you become somebody who really is supposed to learn after, the masters of that, either that machinery on the floor or after those in the office that, you're either going to take over their job or portions of work or whatnot. And at that point, it's those kinds of people that are called friend, son, and heir, and it's those kinds of people that you find in discipleship. And a couple of the things that I really want to draw out and talk about that are going to be over the next couple of weeks is the relationship between these 2 letters. Let me get that little, hold on, let me move this on, why that's showing up on the screen. So if you can see, let me blow this up a lot more so that I can really talk about this for a minute. If you look at these 2 letters right here, this letter Chet is the letter that we studied last week and we discussed, which really shows the 2 letters in front of it, the Vav, which symbolizes man, and the Zayin, which symbolizes the crowned man, coming together in a yoke. And we really, needed to, I think, focus on what it means that in that stage of discipleship, which is what this letter is, we focus on putting our heads in the yoke as Christ offers. Christ says, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart. My yoke is easy and my burden is light." And so if we take an approach, even John capitulates that in his letter. He says, this is how we know we love the children of God, that we observe God's commandments, and his commandments are not burdensome. So he's using this language that reflects back to something that Yeshua said. And that was what I was trying to bring together in some of this teaching to show that the commands that God has given about how to live this life of salvation in the land he's brought us are gifts, really, for us to love one another through, right? For us to be able to have that kind of relationship. So it really should not be unburdening, right, to us to be in a yoke or to put our minds in the book. But oftentimes, and let's maybe just start off a little bit with this discussion, oftentimes I think it proves to be. Now, certainly not because it's difficult to do what God says, but certainly because our flesh gets in the way, and it makes just putting our heads in the book, let alone living out and enacting some of those things, difficult, right? Arlene and I spent a little bit of time this afternoon kind of talking around the edges of some of those things. So I would just ask you guys to either maybe share some insight or some comments, some ideas as to experiences you've either had or things you've found in trying to either make changes, trying to think about, how or where to invest your time to really become, to either keep yourself in the yoke or to stay engaged in, godly things. Would anybody start by speaking on that and share an insight as to what it's been like?
It's very difficult he says it's easy to take his yoke, but it's not, to me, it's not that easy. Because like you said, the fleshly, the earthly things, and you think of, I think how many times that, like when I lost my husband and I thought, there was no yoke there, that it was gone. I went away from the yoke totally. And it seemed easier at the time for a while. But I knew in my mind all the time that no, and sometimes that's more burdensome than taking on the yoke. But then you have your friends and people that you've met when you were not in Christ, and then they start looking at you, and it's hard to explain to them where you've gone back to of what you believe in, and they kind of snub you and think, yeah, well, whatever. So it makes it difficult to yoke yourself to Christ. In the world today, it makes it difficult.
I really do appreciate that insight. It sounded like part of what you said was that although it seems difficult to yoke ourselves because of the pull of the flesh, we can end up finding out that it's actually more difficult living life without being in the yoke. And I would say that probably part of the reason why is because of consequences or results that we know are going to come from actions or from deeds or things that we've done, right? Living outside of it, those consequences we know are right around the corner at some point. And so, like you said, although it may seem like fun for the moment, or it may seem easy for the moment, it's not necessarily.
For me, just the analogy of itself, it's easy for me to put my foot in the yoke. It's harder to stick with it because you're supposed to be led and not fight against it to go my way. It's a direction I'm just supposed to go, as opposed to me trying to go off this direction and do what I want to do. And I think that's been that difficulty, and it's when I chill out and get back into the groove and do things God's way that it is easier. But I've experienced a season like that in my life, and it was short for me, thankfully. And to me, I feel like I was still in that yoke, but in that rebellious stage. Like it was out of pain, emotional trauma that I self-inflicted. But I don't know how to describe it because it sounds like a negative thing. But I was still in the presence of God in the midst of it, even though I was rebelling against Him.
Yes.
Because I tried to do everything to forget about Him, but His presence was there, and I couldn't. So that made it difficult because it's like I'm in the yoke. I don't want to be in the yoke. Let me out of the yoke.
Yeah.
So kind of a different side to that, but we're supposed to be led, and it's our will. But we have to get up.
What is Paul's words Christ's words to Paul about kicking against the goats? Paul was being called, and Paul wasn't listening, and yet he was resisting, kicking against the. And then what that is the context of him kicking against some places it's the goats, some things it gets the pricks, and it's a thing to keep the animals, the ones that bear the yoke, and where they're supposed to be and not.
Is that it?
I think that.
Really?
Yeah, I think, I can't remember what the teaching is, I've heard a couple, but I think he's kind of hitting the nail on the head, that the idea is that it's a fighting against the guides, the guards that are there to keep you in line, kicking against them and basically trying to test them, see how loose they are, and certainly in a way, Paul's initial lifestyle of believing that he fervently knew and understood the Torah, inside and out, and forwards and backwards, and he understood exactly what God wanted, and so he's out killing Stephen and killing everyone else, based on believing this is what God desired of him. And then at that moment, God is telling him, no, you're fighting and kicking and pushing the boundaries out, further than they should be.
That's a good connection.
Yeah, I guess to look at it that way is an interesting insight to really consider. I mean, think about, in some ways it seems like we could consider that Paul had a long way to turn to get to seeing and then supporting the things of Christ rather than fighting against it if he's already been killing people in what he believes is the name of God, right? And in command of the Torah, telling him these are things that you do to people that are coming in. But his knowledge and his awareness of the Scripture was enough in choosing for all those years to put his head in the book, so to speak, and to be a person of the book. His knowledge of those things was enough, I think, for him to turn pretty quickly. I don't know exactly how much time there was. I think Tyler once said that it was over 3 years that he was gone technically, I think, before. Yeah, before
he went through 3 years of training there in Arabia. But
Maybe it wasn't
to
as
study
quick
the
as I thought,
scriptures.
but
To me, it's like the Torah is the yoke, it's the tool, but the goal is the kingdom. So Paul had a lot of knowledge about Torah, and like you said, what he thought God's plan was for the kingdom and how that kingdom comes about and who gets to be in it and who's blaspheming the name of God or who's not. You know, kind of had that little ideal, but the bigger picture is the kingdom.
But because he was a Pharisee of Pharisees, his own words, he knew they'd understand. And the difference between the scriptures for people is, yeah, I can know, but if I don't understand, I'm useless. But I have to understand the heart of God, and he did not understand. Most of the Pharisees, and even Jesus was when he was with Nicodemus, he says, "You're a leader of Israel, and you don't understand these things."
yeah.
Because so the leaders did not understand the heart of God for
Right.
mankind.
David, you gonna say something?
Like for Paul, he had a lot of understanding, but it was obvious from Jesus' words with the Pharisees and the other teachers that they didn't understand what they thought they understood, or they understood things the wrong way. And it takes longer to unlearn and then learn the right thing than it does to be ignorant and learn it the right way.
Yeah.
No, the 12, they weren't ignorant, but they weren't learned men either.
Right.
They hadn't been trained by the sages at that time. They weren't wise enough to be accepted into those schools, right?
Right.
What we would call the rabbis today, they didn't get chosen. They got bypassed. I think that's the main reason that Jesus chose them, because he didn't have to break them of the wrong stuff. He had fresh clay to mold.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. And what I was going to say is, I understand your point that the more training or education that we've received of the wrong information means it takes longer to unlearn that. But I think that length of time to unlearn it is equal to the amount of arrogance we have, number one, about the information we possess. And I think it's equal to the lack of concern that we have towards the idea of being willing to be obedient before we have to understand. And I spent quite a bit of time in my book talking about that and really trying to meditate on it, because in one of the Psalms, God says, taste and see that the Lord is good. So he wants us to sample of what he has without having to understand it first. And in a way, that really deals with the commands. He wants us to sample of those things. So when we have a willingness to be obedient first, rather than waiting until I understand, oh, that makes sense to me, now I'll do it, rather than having that, if we just have a willingness to be obedient and we trust God to reveal to us and trust that he's good, then that length of time diminishes dramatically.
That's childlike faith.
In a way it is, yeah. It's completely trusting him.
No, it's more than just, it's sort of that way. It is exactly.
Yeah.
Christ said, don't forbid the children to come to me.
Yeah.
And then that same passage you were talking about, the yoke, he prays and says, I thank you, Father, for you've kept these things from the wise and the learned and given them to little children.
Mm-hmm.
So it was little children of faith, that children want to please their parents.
Yeah.
Well, as young believers, we want to please our Father in heaven. We want to do that. But we get a little bit of knowledge, and we think we know a lot.
Yeah.
And we're just getting started. And the best we have is, I don't know nothing. That's the best.
Yeah.
And because God is so deep, his what he's called us to is narrow, but it's deep. And it's not hard unless we want to take and fight against it. Then it becomes hard.
What I would suggest too about all this is not thinking with our Western minds of A or B, good or bad, all or nothing. Because something is rarely all good or rarely all bad. I don't believe that Paul was a bad guy. I believe he was not all bad before he met the Messiah on the road to Damascus. He was just, again, when you think about the yoke, how easy is it to start fighting against it? So your examples were spot on, because it's so easy in trying to relate to Paul, where he was at before he saw the Messiah.
Mm-hmm.
It was all with good intention, but it is, when you get more focused on the knowledge, that it is easier to distract and be following my plan or what I think is what God desires to happen, as opposed to sticking with learning from him what his plan is. And that's a very easy misstep to make every day, all the time.
When we get to thinking we know it all, how much joy is there we get in, as being a little child, to go in and learn what our Abba wants? How much joy and how much patience, how much peace there is, and we lose it because we become wise and learned. We're no longer as a child that takes and wants to soak up what our Abba has to say, like we did in our early faith. And I have learned to appreciate the other 3 levels, but I haven't got that first one right yet.
Yeah.
And when we quit being a little child to stay hungry for our Abba, the other 3 don't matter.
Well, I really appreciate you guys have shared a lot of insight and made a lot of comments that go right into exactly the main teaching that I give in between these 2 letters, the one that we're getting ready to go into over the next couple of weeks. And I think I'm about to try and take a look and see if it's proven to be this way, but I think you guys have helped me see something I had not seen before in this, which is what the next several letters, spiritual illustration, may really be about. I'll tell you about that and then we'll take a look. These 2 letters, again, the letter Chet shows the man and the crown man yoked together, and we understand what that relationship is. And as a few of you have pointed out, one thing you notice is that the yoke in this letter is at the head. So if Larry and I are yoked together and I choose to get up and move somewhere, well, he doesn't really have much of a choice. He's going with me. He doesn't have much of a time to think about anything, right? So he either is fighting or he's immediately going with me. But in the transition between these 2 letters, notice that you also see these 2 letters. It's the same thing. It's the crown man, and it's the same letter Vav here on the same side, except there's the yoke is at the foot. So if Larry and I are yoked at the foot, if I get up to move, well, he's got a few minutes to think about whether or not he wants to go with me, or if he wants to just try and stay put and not move at all whatsoever, and then either get drugged or literally hold me in place if I'm not able to move his, right? And that
3-legged drinks.
Yeah.
It's a great picture to bring out, because honestly, for us to win, so to speak, to strive to complete that goal, we have to be literally in lockstep with Yeshua. We have to step at the same time he does, right? So that really is the emphasis, is the main point that Jenny and Larry made at one point is choosing to stay in the yoke.
Yes.
That is what we're talking about. And that's what I've always taught as a transition between these 2 letters, is the choice that we have to make to stay within the yoke. Because the yoke drops to a different place. And where does it drop to? It drops to the foot. And so what is that really a sign of? That is a sign of, first, putting your head in the book, in the Word of God to study, and then putting that yoke and that Word of God into your walk. Right?
Yeah, that's good.
And learning how to move forward. That's really what this transition is. So now here's what I think that you guys may have helped me to see, and I'm going to try and see if this develops a little bit right now. If not, fine. If it does, then we'll develop it further over the next several weeks. But what I've always shared is that actually this was one of the letters that changed not too long ago for me. I didn't always believe, or I didn't always know how to depict this letter, but the letter Tet, I say that the spiritual illustration of that letter now is victory. Now, it takes a little bit to get there, and I'm not going to try and emphasize the whole thing. I'll tell you a little bit of what it means now, but I will tell you that that's why I'm taking a little bit of time over the next few weeks, because I asked Dinah to come in on the 15th and talk to us about that letter. And since she wasn't able, or about that concept, and since she wasn't able to get in here a little bit earlier than the 15th because she was out of town, I just figured we would spend a little bit of review, and I'm glad we are now. But here is really what I think is important about trying to understand discipleship. I think the real question that we're talking about here is, how do I remain in the yoke? And how do I, one, see that the yoke is effective for my life? Staying in it is profitable, right, for me in my life. And how do I, through staying in the yoke, become profitable for the community and for those around me, right? Those are the questions that I think we really should be asking. And I think that what you guys have helped me to see is that maybe the next few letters, I don't know if it's all of this new cycle of 7 that we're in, but maybe the spiritual illustration of all the next few letters are the answer to that. Maybe those are the characteristics that we are to display. Those are the things that we are to focus our minds on so that we maintain that walk. One of the biggest things that we're going to cover at one point tonight and talk about a little bit is the fact that whatever you devote yourself and your time to is what you're then going to confess with your life. So if you're devoting yourself to something that's, unholy, then you're going to end up confessing portions of that in your life. If you're dedicating your time and yourself, devoting it to things that are of God and that are holy, then you're going to end up confessing those things with your life. So saying that the spiritual illustration of this letter is victory comes into the idea, and this is why I asked Dinah to come in a couple of weeks and speak about it, because she spent a lot of time talking about the temple and what it means to be kingdom people and the establishment of the kingdom. And my transition in part of this is seeing and understanding that once a disciple has been made and created, which is what we have in the letter of Het, once that disciple, that new creation, that new man has been made, we are then sent out with like a twofold purpose. One, as a disciple, having the yoke go to our feet and having that discipleship go into our walk, we go out into the world or out of the kingdom, either out into the kingdom or even sometimes the outside of the kingdom, and we are to give testimony of the victory established by Christ. Paul writes, quoting one of the Psalms, I believe, "Where now, O death, is your sting? There is no victory. Death does not have victory over us." Right? It's been quashed. So, in a way, I believe two things, this is what I talked to Dinah about, two things come out of that. One, we go out sharing the gospel into the kingdom, right, as new disciples, but also at some point we are to be bringing a message or a report of victory, I believe, back to God. In other words, produced fruit. We spent a lot of time talking about that in one of our Bible studies, about being God's vineyard and how He's given us everything that we need to be able to produce fruit. And so He should have a fair expectation that we are producing fruit since He's given us the tools. So if we go out and we achieve this message of, what Christ has done in our lives and we share that, then hopefully we are helping other people to produce fruit. And when we find ourselves in prayer, when we find ourselves on the Sabbath, if you will, even on a weekly reminder, praying and spending time in fellowship with God, we should hopefully be able to give a report, to some degree of fruit or fruit that we've, seen other people produce and praise them for that. So if that makes sense, I would ask you guys just to maybe consider that, maybe comment at all, talk more about, what are ways that we think we can maintain keeping ourselves in that yoke? What are things that we can do that help us maintain that walk and that relationship? Want to say something, Larry?
Yeah. I guess today there was as I shared a little earlier about struggling. I think like with Israel, when they left Egypt, God kept having to remind them of one thing: who brought them out?
Yes.
Who brought them out of Egypt? He says, I did, with an outstretched arm. He says, I brought you out of Egypt, the house of slavery. Sometimes our enemy does not like us to remember who we are and whose we are. So he distracts us. And spent a couple hours this afternoon in my garage listening to, you all ever heard of Bill and Gloria Gaither? I used to listen to their reunion videos, homecoming videos, a lot, and love music. But some old songs about remembering the goodness of God and understanding the real goal here. It isn't here. It's in heaven, the New Jerusalem, and being in God's presence And our enemy does not want us to do that. He wants us to forget who we are and who brought us this far and how we got here. They got through the wilderness. I mean, they went through from Egypt to Sinai, and God provided for them the whole way. And if He provided for them the whole way, you would think that they would realize that they survived and they're still there. But yet Israel was constantly in rebellion and pushing against the yoke,
Yeah.
always. And He kept telling them, did I not bring you out of Egypt? They're trying to remind them of their taskmaster, the Egyptians, how hard they were on them. And God had done nothing but be good to them. So sometimes we just have to remember who it is that got us where we are, and sometimes looking back down the altars that they built. Then Joshua built an altar. They had to pick up 12 stones, and they built when they crossed the Jordan. They built an altar on the other side, and that was for remembrance. Constantly, God wanted them to remember where they had come from, the road they traveled, and how they got where they were.
Let me just tell you how much I really appreciate him sharing all that. I had said, I don't mean this to sound egotistical, I'm just trying to put this sense together right now, but I had said that I was thinking that the next few letters would paint that picture for us of how we remain in the yoke. And Larry literally almost every section just described what the next letter is for us. The next letter, Yod, in Hebrew, the letter Yod literally means hand. And what he kept describing is that God was reminding the people of his hand in their lives and what he was doing. And the symbolization of that letter is smallness or anonymity, or coming into the presence of the Lord, which again is what he's wanting us to remember. And then I used to say that the spiritual illustration of this letter was the Shekinah glory of God, but I changed it at one point to just simply saying it's the fear of the Lord, because as the text tells us, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So if we really want to keep ourselves in the yoke and we want to remain there, then we need to have wisdom. And the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So if we understand that He was stronger than the problems that once subdued us and held us in captivity, at minimum, fear would be a good place to start, just understanding that He was greater than those things. And so us looking to cross Him or cross some issue would be foolishness, right? And so it should be the beginning of wisdom for us, let alone, as it was taught to me later, really having, and this is something that really only came in my maturity, not through, in the beginning I don't really get it, but having a real proper fear of the Lord means putting first an appreciation and an attention to what He cares about.
Yes.
And understanding and recognizing that you fear grieving Him, grieving His Spirit by doing things that do not bring Him pleasure, right? It's not a matter of keeping commandments simply mechanically because He says to and we do it. It's a matter of recognizing that if His Spirit is expressing to me that is something that will not be pleasing, then I shouldn't be doing it.
Right.
I shouldn't be looking at things that way. So yeah, I really appreciate that.
We should know when we're grieving in the Holy Spirit, there's a feeling of separation between us and the Father, and it's because we're pushing against the yoke. We want to get out of that, and if we don't want to grieve the Spirit, then best thing to do is stop.
Well, and again, because I'm always, my thing, you're deception, I'm kingdom. So my battle is build my kingdom or build God's kingdom. And the outstretched arm, He led them out of Egypt, not because of who they are, but because of who He is. And it was by His strength that He made it happen.
Yeah.
And that's, a part of what you're saying. I need to remember it's who He is and His strength that has brought me where I'm at, not what I've done. Because that's what I tend to want to do, is for me to fix my problem myself and to take back control, and again, try to buck the yoke and do it my way.
I don't know.
Strength.
I don't know if this is necessarily going to be agreeable for everybody, but one thing I've taught over the years that it seemed to be synonymous with me about Scripture is that one of the difference between miracles and blessings is that one always involves a man, and that's miracles. Every time there's a miracle that takes place, it's always some man or more working in conjunction with God. When there's a blessing, that's just simply God 100% There's no ifs, ands, or buts. There's no, like, I did this, and so God blessed me with that. I mean, not having cursing in our lives is simply a matter of not walking in cursing. It's simply putting the oil in the gears by, observing the lamps, the commandments. But miracles like the holding up of the staff, with Aaron and Hur on either side of Moses, literally, as I saw Grant teach it years ago, whenever the hands of Moses are relaxed, right, is when the battle goes towards the flesh, and whenever his hands are lifted up, it goes towards God, and goes towards his people. And so he has someone on either side helping him. God strengthens all of them together to enable him to do that. When you see the parting of the Red Sea, which is not something a man can do by himself, he requires Moses to go and stand on a rocky ledge and hold the staff up. And the whole time he's holding it, the Red Sea is split. And there's multiple other miracles in the scripture that always require a man somewhere in that. And so there are certainly many times in our lives when we need to understand that sometimes it's just simply 100% God giving us what is needed to accomplish something or to do something, which is our being blessed. But other times, to perform a miracle or to see that take place even in someone else's life, it's us having to trust and literally stand side by side with him and see, him working through our hands or whatnot and helping us to accomplish things. So I think that's important to understand. Sometimes we need him, certainly be in our lives and help us get through certain things. I know some days it sure feels like a miracle, but I'm still sitting here, looking to do a Bible study at the end of a week or a month or whatever else. So yeah, certainly without the presence of his Spirit, it'd be a lot tougher. Anybody else have any comments to share, anything at this point, or? All right, let's look at the next couple and just kind of move forward and see. Again, we talked about the letter Yod, meaning hand, and talking about the fear of Adonai, and that being maybe a good place that we use that, and we use the relationship of that in our lives to help us try and stay in the yoke. Keep our minds in godly things. That's going to require us staying focused on reading the Word and putting our minds in the yoke. Please, again, if you guys have any insights or anything to share about how, over the years, the experiences that you've had trying to stay in or getting pulled from these things, let us know. The second letter, Kaf, I have as spiritually illustrating righteousness. And I think that in a sense, righteousness, being the righteousness of God, having the righteousness of Christ put on us, is a miracle. And what I mean by that is, one of the things that I've always shared when we were talking about justification, in a sense, is to say, who did I think I was before coming to knowledge of Christ, before coming into yoke and relationship with Christ? Who did I think I was to do any good thing for my neighbor? Was I patting myself on the back for having come up with this wonderful, great idea to do this great, wonderful thing for my neighbor, and then patting myself on the back for doing it? There's no good deed that Phil has ever done that God didn't design, that God didn't establish as something that we should do, something that we should walk in for our community, for our neighbors. And so if the righteousness of Christ is imparted to us, and he is perfect in his entirety, and righteousness itself, and the command itself is him being the word that came down from heaven, if all of that is created through him, then the righteousness of Christ being imparted to us means that we have the ability, right, to do righteous things. And if a miracle, again, always involves a man, being involved in that, then that means if it's imparted to us, we have a need to display it. Right? We have an incumbent responsibility on us. If the righteousness of Christ is imparted to us, I think we have an incumbent responsibility to display it.
If I can add to that real quick.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm going to find
Oh, you
that.
want that? Okay. A lot of what I've learned about righteousness, other than just being a word that was bandied about all the time, it's a really big concept to grasp of how the righteousness of one man can affect many. Whether that's Christ through, as you're describing, the gift that he gives to us, but even if I do righteous acts, what other people I can bless. Still in the name of God. But there's just something, it's very deep and you can't go into it all now, but there's just something about this concept of it's through the righteousness of one person that many can receive a gift. It's throughout all the scriptures. That's something new that I've come to appreciate. And we're all capable of giving that gift. There's different levels of that gift. You know, it's not, I'm not saying that we would be equal to the gift of righteousness that Christ gives us, but just a righteous act is a very special gift to give to other people. That there's grace given to them if we can act in right ways.
That's it.
And it's just powerful to me to grasp. Because I think we rightfully should focus on God. But as a Christian for many, many years, I did not really ever take an opportunity to, I guess I should say, my starting point was always an assumption that I could never be that good. Almost like, why try? I don't know if that makes any sense. But I don't have to be perfect and I don't have to be Christ. But I can still do a righteous act to the benefit of other people. That I may not know how that impacts their life. But
If you were living righteously, you should, when you that we do that automatically and not even realize now that we have touched other people.
right, that's what I mean. I never expected myself
Yeah.
to be able to give that to others. I expected to receive it from Christ so that it can be seen, but I just didn't think about it as a gift that my obedience
And do it with,
can
and
give
knowing
that,
when we are doing it.
yeah, just a different way to think about it. Sorry for veering off track there.
He wasn't even paying attention.
No, it's all right. I heard.
No.
I heard. I was trying to find a different verse, but
Just makes it a little bit less of a word and more of a possibility of something that I can do to walk out that I never really entertained before. I was thinking about the power of God doing all these things, which He does, but of me being a tool to also impart, allow the opportunity for God to do more to other people. So it's like a conductor.
yeah. I think part of the emphasis is to strive to display righteousness and basically the image of Christ through love and the fear of the Lord, rather than just through the simplicity of deed, or the simplicity of just a mechanical observance of things. All throughout Romans 3 and 4, Paul is really writing and talking about, at one point, I think it's in chapter 3, he's talking about the law, the Torah, and the prophets witnessing and recognizing the presence of righteousness. And I think that if we are, kind of going back to an earlier comment that you made, I think that Proverbs 6:23 says that the mitzvah is the command, or the commandment is the lamp, and the light that is activated is the Torah, right? Or the mitzvah, the commandment is the lamp, and the Torah is the light. And I think that the emphasis for us is, if we really want to shine the light of God's instruction, if we really want to shine the light that reveals His heart and shows what it is, then we activate love, we activate the power of Christ, right? We activate the presence of His Spirit within ourselves through the observance of the commands to be able to shine light. And in a way, shining the or activating the lamp, I think, is a matter of truly utilizing the righteousness of Christ imparted to us through love and using love to actually activate it. I don't think like, a physical observance, certainly, me just getting up in the morning and choosing to, put on pants that have tzitzit already hanging from them, or choosing to tie them on new jeans or whatever else, is not certainly shining God's light. It's not presenting anything, especially when I'm still sitting in my bedroom and I'm with no one. If I am choosing to adorn myself with visible characteristics of God through love and trust and faith and beauty and things of that nature, then they're really seeing light. Those are the things that illuminate, the truth. So I think that when we really truly use love and we really truly understand, justification and righteousness in our lives in the presence of it, and we desire and we seek to display Christ, then that is what helps us activate the commandment, if you will. It's what actually is the on switch, so to speak, that we, fumble to try and get a hold of to actually turn on the lamp, if that makes sense. Does anybody else
That's
have
the heart of it. That's the weightier matter of Torah. That's the heart of it, to exhibit it in love.
Yeah, it's definitely the spirit of God's intention. Again, his, the statement over and over, so that you will live successfully in the land that I brought you into. By no means, anywhere in any of that, does it mean so that, and now that I think about it, I'd have to go back and look at the Hebrew, but I'm going to guess that the you is actually plural instead of singular. So by no means anywhere in that does he mean so that you, Phil Taylor, will live successfully.
Right.
What he means is you and everybody together on the plural in the community. So that you all live together successfully, not just each individual. So we really, have a need to do the things that we do for the sake of those around us. Certainly not just for ourselves. Again, this is how we know we love the children of God, not how we know how we love ourselves or whatever. But we know we love the children of God because of what we observe and choose to do with our lives, rather than just simply believe, of course. Well, this is really, I'll just kind of breeze through this real quick. And if you guys have any questions, I'll tell you. And I think this is something I'm going to need to spend a little more time writing about, trying to further develop over the next few weeks. But we talked about how the first 7 letters paint a picture of kind of like a menorah, and there was an interrelationship between them. We spent some time on that last week looking at that. Well, the next 7 letters would go from Chet, right, which is where our discipleship begins. And so the next 6 letters after that would be the vehicles that we use to maintain a walk and maintain keeping our minds in the yoke, right? If that's what I'm saying now, if that's what I'm looking to teach, then those vehicles are going to be sharing the victory, which is the very first thing that we believe a disciple normally, and that's the first thing we teach in our churches anyway, right? Is that the disciple goes out and shares the knowledge of the gospel, of the kingdom of heaven, and the relationship with Christ. I will teach that there's a twofold responsibility in that where we are also, and on a weekly basis, I'll say, if nothing else on the Sabbath, we are to report back to God at least about what we've seen, and at least for our own benefit so that we can be consciously aware of, I prayed for this, I prayed for that, I saw that you've answered that, I see that this has taken place. I've talked with such and such and seen this take place. So the other vehicles would be fear. Fear is the beginning of wisdom. Understanding and observing fruitful labor and righteousness, right? Having fruitful practice of distributing Christ's righteousness from our lives. And the last 3, to complete the set, this is a very new one for me too, is ministering, testimony, and humility. Honestly, I think those are really good vehicles that help us maintain staying within that yoke, keeping that yoke within our walk, right? Because we are maintaining, and there's a transition of a couple of things here that I want to share about ministering and witnessing, or testimony. Ministering is something that just came to me the most recently since I started attending Mount Gilead, about 6 months ago or something. I think it was about that long ago. Jeff Fall was giving a message about having a place at the table. And he was talking about several different things to that. And I realized at that time that there was something that needed to change in this teaching here, which was the letter Lamed, or Lamed, I used to have as witnessing. And when you witness something, you give testimony about it. So that for years that fit in there because that's what you give testimony of, or the things that you witness, right? And that would kind of make sense in our walk too, that the things we witness we would give testimony of. But I realized in listening to some of his sermon and some later work and study that I did on my own, that witnessing is really a part of what ministering is. Because we aren't supposed to just witness things that people are going through or things that people are doing, but we are also supposed to, with that knowledge or with the tools God's given us, minister to needs. So if we witness that there is a need in someone's life, we are supposed to minister to it, invite them to the table, bring them in to wherever we're at and be able to try and meet those needs. And so, God bless you, Larry. So that ended up changing for me. And I ended up changing that in this teaching because we really should meet people's needs and kind of minister to them with where they're at. When we have properly understood what it means to, as Abraham did, run from our tents to greet someone and meet them and invite them in and minister, to their needs and, feed them and offer them different things, to be able to do all of those things helps us to build up testimony that we can give later. And at the same time, it should also help us to build up a humility and understanding how to maybe perhaps talk more about what those guests did or had accomplished in their life rather than what we did for them, right? And spend more time in humility trying to figure out how to meet their needs rather than doing anything else. And that letter there, picturing humility, would really kind of end out this section of how do I maintain keeping myself in that yoke. And that's really, I think, what this second group of 7 letters would be, and I think that's what I would see there in parts, is trying to understand, how do I maintain this walk? How do I keep myself in there? So
Servant, all of that is servant.
Yeah, definitely, it definitely would be.
All those
And
are keys of.
getting into some kind of craziness of things that, of course, my brain sometimes gets crazy and does all kinds of weird things. So if you were to take the 7 sets of letters and put them like this and look at what is connected with the 3 menorahs, you actually will have the letter Chet, which represents discipleship, being right on then that letter Aleph, which is servanthood.
Yeah.
So you literally would have these 3 groups of letters. If you guys understand what I'm saying, you would literally have that, and you would see those lining up, right, and talking about that. And the one that really, on the 3rd group, now that I'm putting it together in my brain, would be the letter Samech, which illustrates trust. And so the servant who has become a disciple and really puts their mind in that should be exhibiting beyond anything else that they fully have invested their trust in God. And they are showing and exhibiting this emphasis, this desire to want to, share that, I think, as a disciple with the community around them. Go ahead, David.
I've been playing with something in my mind, and I don't know if it is valid or.
Well, let me ask real quick. After our last Bible study, should I keep this on the video or?
Yeah, I was thinking in terms of military speaking, that the first 7 would be like boot camp.
Yeah.
These are the first 7, these are the things that you need to learn going through boot camp to graduate to the point where in the second group, you have now learned enough to be a foot soldier in the Army.
And there is still, when you, I've never been in the military, so I don't know for sure, but when you get into that second group, so to speak, it's basically you've completed boot camp, but you still have a lot of education.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
still have a
but one of
lot.
the things
You
you
have-
had is you've congealed as a group
You're right.
Yeah.
through that training,
You're now yoked together.
Yeah, that's a
You
great
now work
point.
as a team.
Yeah, that's a great point.
You
'Cause that,
learn how to work, and you've also learned how to take orders.
Yeah.
You've learned to follow whoever is above you in the pecking order.
because a lot of, sorry if I'm interrupting, but
Right.
a lot of that is breaking down your rebellious nature to be an individual to make you think as a group. That's the whole
Yeah.
point of boot camp.
Thank God.
So that you can listen to the higher authority giving you the orders of what you need to do, which is what we need to do to not struggle against the yoke. That's a good example.
When you get into combat, if you're operating on your own,
Yeah.
you're either gonna get yourself killed or somebody else killed.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very
Because there's
true.
somebody else that sees the bigger picture going on that you need to obey.
Yeah, this really went right into what I was thinking too. Then, so really what this picture would paint would be that the 3rd set then, I always thought that the 3rd set, like all of this, I always kind of envisioned it almost all as like the boot camp, maybe just later more mature stages of it, but I'm actually seeing now that this 3rd group is actually, like we'll look at what the 3rd group is here in a moment, but I think that what I'm seeing now is that this 3rd group of letters are, once you reach this stage, you should be trained up enough in your education that you can teach others through example, not through word, but you can teach others how to do these 7 things. And looking at them, go ahead.
Well, the point of boot camp isn't even to learn anything. it's to be broken down,
Yeah, to be
to
made
be
ready.
retrained. And it's the second phase, like what you're describing,
Yeah,
that's where you're really learning the lessons.
and that's why it begins
Yeah,
with discipleship.
You
That
get
is-
to
Right, the
practice
military
it.
special.
One through
Yeah.
7 is learning submission,
Yeah,
Yeah,
being
Yeah.
broken down.
yeah.
Then you are able to be a practical foot soldier.
Well,
That
and
makes
if you can go back up to the beginning of this group of letters. So I really liked, this is what I saw when you brought out head, and then what's after that? Ted. So when you brought those out, that one's at the forehead and the other's at the foot, and what it made me think of is when Yeshua sends them out in pairs.
yeah,
You know, to go, they were sent out now to go spread the, so that's almost like the second phase of like, okay, now you learned a little bit, now put to practice. It's like this temporary, let me try to put into practice what I've learned so far. Because you've still got a buddy system of sorts, and you're doing it together. But no, I really like that analogy. But I just wanted to mention that. That's what I thought about at the
that's
feet
good. I
going
appreciate
out in twos, and I think we need to be yoked together, whether it's in marriage or friendship or whatever it is. I really think, at least in pairs, is beneficial. I think that's a big thing to helping us stay in the yoke for
Yeah.
accountability and encouragement and strength.
Yeah, I really appreciate the insight you guys brought out about becoming one cohesive unit. As Larry said, being echad, being one, which is what that word means. I mean, that's really the purpose, again, is all of us being prepared in our individuality, right? But yet, and being given different gifts and strengths, and then going through the boot camp, so to speak, to understand what they are. But then once we get to that point of discipleship, it's about being able to utilize them together, being all part of the same body, and being able to all walk in lockstep. I mean, the discipleship doesn't begin, or what?
Camaraderie.
Yeah.
And that's what John says all the time. They will know us by our love,
Right.
that we are one.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
They
fantastic.
will know, it
They,
brings the love into it.
So what is what it wants to,
The head there, I find that's the end of the first 7, right? Or is that the
That's the
beginning of the second?
beginning of
That's
it.
the beginning. Yeah, that's the
Okay.
beginning of the next.
When
seven.
the disciples went through the breaking process, they went and were yoked up with who? The Holy Spirit. It was Christ. He says his yoke is easy, but who was it that was sent to yoke up with the disciples? It was the Holy Spirit. And because every man, the Spirit knows every gift that was given to these men. So he would know how to pull
Mhm.
or to guide in that being yoked up with. It says the crown man, but I see there the Holy Spirit as being the one that I'm yoked with as God's Spirit, Spirit of Christ that lives in me, as Paul puts it. And we're going to produce that fruit. And it's a Spirit's fruit, and we don't know how to do that. So we need to let Him lead us.
And this is gonna sound like an oversimplification. But Israel's problem is my problem, is our problem. So I love the boot camp analogy, it just makes so many things click right now, which
That hit close to home, huh?
yeah, well, I mean, I've heard it used in different ways, but for some reason, just things are clicking, but you gotta believe in the mission.
right,
You enlisted, right now it's a volunteer army, you enlisted for a reason, so you gotta believe in the mission to start up too. So you're investing yourself into it to be broken down and to be a part of it. And so I feel like when we're so focused again on myself, if I'm only focused on myself, that's what's tearing us apart. That's what our distraction is. That keeps us out of the yoke, as opposed to being a group on a mission together. Whether I understand all of it or not is not the point, because I'm never going to see the full big picture. But to hear the voice of the Holy Spirit, who knows everything, or to to not fight against that yoke, to seek the voice of God instead of bouncing around talking about, well, what is your opinion? What do you think? Just, when you're only stuck with the human voices, that's what we tend to do, because it's just easier. But, I don't know.
Wow, a lot of great insight. I really am appreciating our time together and our study. I will just kind of give us just a glimpse, I think, into what some of these other, how this will end as we go through. And starting with trust, I think all the rest of these then, they should be things that on a daily basis we display, and things that we display more through example, certainly, than just verbally. And I think that if we really are looking at this from the analogies that we are as training and maturity and growth and really learning how to take on and walk in those things, then our goal and our emphasis with this third should be to find ways and to find that opportunity in our lives to help other people see how to accomplish these things, how to experience these things. And I'm really glad to kind of see it this way in my own life right now, because some of those areas, like some of you, I'm sure, I'm really struggling in, right? Having and displaying and exhibiting peace right now is sometimes very difficult for me. It feels like it's very far out of reach. But I am no fool to understanding, as God's given me years ago to continue teaching, that peace is not something that is handed to you. Peace is something that you have to work for. Peace is something that you have to really put forth effort and time in choosing to do what needs to be done to have it. Peace is something that you should also, if given, if blessed with in our lives for any reason or whatnot, something that we should definitely utilize to its fullest advantage, not just certainly for our own sake, but for the sake of those around us. But all of those things. I mean, trust is definitely where those things would start. And then one thing that I found as well is certainly when you, this is how I've always taught it over the years, is when you reach this point in this stage in the alphabet, you also find that there is a consecutive order where it comes basically in groups of twos after trust. The way I look at it is that you have one and it always leads to the other. Like right after trust, you have devotion and confession. And the reason why these two immediately follow each other is because the letter ayin literally is the Hebrew word for eyes, and the Hebrew word pay is literally the word for mouth. Okay? And so whatever it is that comes inside of you is what comes right back out of you. Right? So whatever goes inside the eyes comes right out of the mouth normally. And so this is really speaking volumes spiritually about devotion and confession, because whatever we devote our time to is what we then soon confess with our lives. The next set of two after that is obedience and circumcision. If we are walking in obedience, and sometimes I've wondered why it seems like these were in the order that they are, because sometimes it always kind of felt like it was backwards to me, but I don't think it is. I think that the psalm, again, I'm going to refer back to the psalm that says, taste and see that the Lord is good. Again, we have to be willing to be obedient before we understand, what it means. And having that willingness towards obedience removes the blockage in our lives that prevents the obedience or creates disobedience. And that's really what circumcision is. I know that may seem strange to have on here as a spiritual illustration, but circumcision, as it was taught to me over the years, is really the removal of blockage. That's what it is. In the scripture, we're told that there is obviously the male organ that is circumcised, and then there are also a circumcised heart, circumcised lips. Our ears should be circumcised, right? In other words, the one thing that they all have in common is the flow of seed, right? This is something that they all have in common. And so if we really want the flow of God's seed coming in our ears, coming out of our mouths, and all those things, then there needs to be blockage removed. Anything there that's preventing that or causing that flow to be stemmed or whatnot needs to be removed. And so having a willingness towards obedience needs to precede that, because that is what creates circumcision. That's what creates the removal of these things. The letter that circumcision, the reason, and of course as we get to these letters and we go through them, I'll give you more of the description of how we got to that illustration. But with this one, I'll tell you right now, is that the letter Kof is literally the first letter of the word kadosh, which means to be holy. And to have blockage removed from your life. And to do, and here's really the crux, the key of what I mean to say, to choose to do the things that God says to do. To remove that blockage from your life. And to try and incorporate his lamps, his commandments into your life, to shine the light of, his character and everything. To incorporate those things in there means to remove the blockage of anywhere in your life that you wouldn't be walking in blessing, that you wouldn't be able to accomplish the things of God, holy things, right? And so once you have incorporated those things into your life and basically been circumcised, then you literally are setting yourself apart. You literally are holy. That's what, to be holy, that's literally what it means. It means just to be set apart. God says, be holy because I am holy. So when you are literally doing and putting in place what you need to remove blockage of your life, to have peace, to have life, to have it abundantly, to have blessing, to share it with other people, to do that is to set yourself apart unto Him, to do the things that He says that set you apart. So with that, I think then it goes into the last two, as you can see, which is discipline certainly precedes peace. And that's what I was trying to say earlier, is that I know I'm very full to the knowledge and the understanding, man, that if I want to have peace in my life, I've got to be disciplined in the things of God, because that is the result. Being disciplined in the things of God, being disciplined in what God says, being disciplined in self-control, certainly, not raging, not getting angry, not being frustrated to the point of rage or anything else, is a matter of discipline. Disciplining myself to get to a point where those things aren't happening, and then that, again, is like, even working backwards to this would be the removal of blockage from my life, where I can continue to walk in obedience rather than just, feign obedience or something. So, all that makes sense? Does it seem to get somewhere?
Yeah, because so much, how you feel so much better when you remove that blockage and that.
Yeah.
Yeah, instead of drama.
Absolutely.
It's wonderful.
Yeah, praise God.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have any questions, thoughts, comments, or anything to share about this, or any questions about where we've been so far, or just anything altogether? Or? All right, well, if you guys didn't notice, the last letter, as we'll get to it, is kind of like in a classification of its own, right? So there's 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. If we're looking at them in groups of 7, and that would cover, in 3 groups, that would cover 21 letters. And so all of those concepts will find their conclusion in the cross, right? All of our efforts, all of our purpose, in a sense, finds its individuality, finds its identity, finds its fulfillment in the power of the cross and the work of the cross. And the last letter, tav, that's literally what the word means, is either a mark or a sign. It can also mean cross. And I say the spiritual illustration of that is reconciliation. And when we get to that letter, hopefully we'll spend some time talking about what Paul affectionately refers to as us having a ministry of reconciliation appointed to us. Because when we are effectively displaying these and other traits, again, this isn't all intended to be set in stone as though this is all there is to discipleship, but once we are displaying perhaps these traits and other ones that God reveals to us and in us, then we are, I believe, effectively working within a ministry of reconciliation, helping people to understand what it means to be drawn into relationship with God, and what it means to, hopefully, for them to see us lifting up Christ so that He draws all men to Himself, and people see, the works in His name that we do or whatnot, just simply bring glory to God, and then they'll glorify God in that rather than us, certainly.
Doesn't a bondservant, isn't that a servant that has chosen to stay with his master?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then they're marked with the all, and it's usually, you say, the sign of the cross in their ear.
The doorposts.
Yeah. Yeah, so what I shared about that years ago, God revealed this little picture to me, is, I think it's in Exodus. As a matter of fact, I think it's not too far after the 10 Commandments. I want to say chapter 22 or 27 or something, but in Exodus there is the laws given for the servant who stays in your household. And what's interesting, and I shared this on a Tuesday night, I think, in the group, but in the law it says at one point that if any fruit, well, I'll just have to share basically the scripture, the commandments say that if the slave, it's time for him to be free, if he brought a wife and children in with him, then they are to leave with him. But if the master whom he was staying with gave him a wife, who then gave him children or whatnot. If the master gave him a wife, then the wife and the children were to stay because they were basically fruit that belongs to the master. And a couple of times, not just on Tuesday, but a couple of times when I read that out loud and began to talk about it, people sometimes gasp because that sounds like a heinous place to be. But at the end of the day, it is a real teaching tool and lesson for us to understand that the fruit of our family, who is our family, the fruit produced, through our spousal relationships, should all belong to God. And that is what the whole emphasis is. That those are things that belong to Him, right? And so we should give proper ownership to where ownership is due. Just like give to Caesar what is Caesar's, give to God what is God's. And so the idea is this: if he loves his family and he desires to stay, which whether the family he brought in with him or whether they were given to him or what is irrelevant to this. If the servant desires that he wants to stay in the home, then he is taken to the doorpost, right? The door frame. The letter Tav has this little foot on it, but what does it look like? It looks like a door frame, okay? Interestingly, if we scroll back up here to the letter Het, it looks like a door frame, right? The only difference between Het and Tav is the little foot that's on the left side of the letter. So when he returns to either the place of discipleship, or he is taken, the slave is taken to either the place of discipleship or the place of reconciliation, the place of the cross, if you will, he is taken to the door frame of the home, and in all, a little boring instrument is taken, and basically his ear is pierced to the door frame. And literally, his blood becomes one with the door frame of the home in which he was in, and he is showing that that is the kingdom, if you will. Of course, I'm using all the spiritual language. That is the place he desires to reside. And the emphasis that Larry is making is that what God revealed me years ago is that the word ratzah is the action of boring. Okay, and so literally in the Hebrew is what it is saying is you will bore through his ear with the instrument of boring. And that's basically what it's saying. So the word is kind of used twice. And so the word martzeh is the name of the awl, the name of the tool that is used to do the boring. And basically you're putting a mem, when you use that as a prefix, it means from, and then you're using the word for boring, which is ratzah. And so the word is martzeh. And so this instrument, this awl, is from the action of boring. And so literally the word martzeh in Hebrew, the 4 letters used to spell it, have a numerical value and added together of 400, which happens to be the numerical value of the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet, Tav, which is the word for cross. So literally it's the mark of the cross, if you will, that is used to mark him at the door frame. And of course the Tav even looks like a door frame, right? And so he's literally marked with this at the door frame to show that he has chosen to assimilate himself, to keep himself in that place. And so he becomes marked with that, which again is the emphasis of take up your cross and bear it daily.
Reconcile to stay there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Choose to follow
To
him.
reside in the house, in his family's house.
To reside in the yoke, to stay. Because if he's choosing to stay within that household, he is also choosing to stay in admitting and committing himself to stay within the realm of the commands, of the instruction, of the plans given for that household.
Because the ideal is for, the ideal of all the commandments of this slave, for slavery is the masters are supposed to be so good to all their servants that they all want to stay there when their time of service is over.
Yeah.
A true Israelite would be such a good master, full of love and compassion, that there's nowhere else they'd rather be.
And that's how God is with us.
Yeah.
Praise God.
And good stuff.
Yeah, it was a
You're
good
right,
place.
yes.
I am. I'm like, sorry, it just hit me all of a sudden.
All right,
This is so good.
No coffee.
I know. See, that's why I can't.
You should, didn't Arlene
Decaf
have coffee?
with
You should have coffee
We're
going
gonna
on.
end our